Once upon a time, Warren Buffett said that the stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. Many didn't understand this, but one woman, an IRS auditor, followed this rule and became a multimillionaire. Who was she? How did she create such an insane fortune while working a 9-to-5? And most importantly, can everyone else do the same today? This is the story of Anne Scheiber and everything we can learn from her career as an investor. Anne Scheiber retired from the IRS in 1994, and at the peak of her career, she made around $4,000 per year. Of course, this was a relatively good salary back when gas was 15 cents a gallon, and a new house would cost less than $4,000. But nobody could build a fortune on this salary. So when Anne retired at the age of 51, she took home a $5,000 lump sum and an annual pension of $3,000. 50 years later, when she passed away, her net worth should have been, what, barely $100,000 or something, right? Well, no. It was actually an insane $22 million. In 1995, Anne's lawyer, Ben Clark, talked to the New York Times after her net worth became public knowledge, and his exact words were, "You think Warren Buffett was good at this sort of thing? She ran rings around Warren Buffett." And it's true. You see, Anne Scheiber didn't believe in spending all her money on life's luxuries. Instead, she focused on living a simple life, thriving off of the small pension she received from the IRS and her Social Security check. Almost 80% of her income went towards savings while she was working, and she would barely spend anything on herself. Her broker and lawyer said that Anne would find cheaper alternatives to everything, even hot dogs for lunch. Her main focus was always saving money, any way she could, and that's precisely what put her in the same league of investors as Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn, and even Bill Ackman. According to Anne's executor, she started her investment with around $20,000 rather than the widely believed sum of $5,000. But still, turning $20,000 into $22 million is mind-blowing to say the least. The big question is, how'd she do it? In the world of investments, especially in stocks and shares, the first rule of thumb is to always get in as soon as you can. But Anne didn't begin investing until her retirement at the age of 51. However, the big difference was that once she invested, she rarely jumped out. She held her stocks for as long as she could, even when they were at the lowest point. Ultimately, the stock prices compounded over time and made her a handsome profit. But her biggest money move was in 1950 when she bought 1,000 shares of Schering Plough Pharmaceutical. For years, she left this stock unattended, and thanks to stock splits and dividend reinvestment, she ended up with 128,000 shares. These were worth $7.5 million alone, and this was the first time she became a millionaire. The rest of her portfolio included blue-chip stocks like Exxon, Chrysler, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi, and various others. She didn't believe in getting rich quick. All she cared about was stocking up, literally. Many believe that Anne made her fortune from investing only in stocks that multiplied in value over time. And yeah, that's true, but this wasn't her secret. In fact, her strategy was to never sell any stock, no matter how much it plummeted. The idea of paying brokerage transaction fees never appealed to her because, well, why pay someone so you could get your money back? She just left the stocks alone. For decades, her brokerage account looked like it was abandoned. Her dividends were reinvested, kept compounding. In the 1970s, when the drug companies saw a bloodbath in their charts, Anne didn't panic and sell. Similarly, during the 1987 crash, she just thought that the general market had gotten overpriced, hence the crash. Other than that, she was adamant that her stocks would come back with time. And that's precisely what happened. So here's what we can take away from this. First, hold on to stocks. You see, this is the biggest lesson any investor can learn from Anne Scheiber's career. In the stock market, letting your winners run for years at a time is what separates the best investors from the trailing pack. Only a select few people understand that it takes a lot of patience to hold stocks for months, let alone decades. It's a volatile market, and people often panic when a stock price goes down. And it's natural, but going against these natural feelings is exactly what separates the greats like Anne Scheiber from the rest of the investors. Number 2, buy what you know. The second big lesson is that buying stocks blindly can land you in big trouble. However, if you only invest in stocks that you know are going to change the market, the result is entirely different. Anne was a very boring person, at least by Gen Z standards today. She didn't have a lot of interest outside of her work life. except for maybe watching movies. This interest led her to invest in top names like Paramount, Columbia, and ABC. Because of her work, she also knew a bit about pharmaceutical companies, so investing in Pfizer's and Bristol-Myers was a no-brainer. Another example was Coca-Cola. It was the most popular soda and still is, and she bought shares there too. However, when Pepsi came along, she hesitated at first. It was a direct competitor and there weren't a lot of people who thought any cola would be better than Coke. But once she tried it, she knew it had potential. Anne was one of the very first investors in Pepsi, and well, we all know how big Pepsi became over the years. Looking at how Anne invested her money, it becomes clear that buying what you know isn't exactly about purchasing stocks of your favorite company. There's no point in buying stocks of Apple, Samsung, or Tesla, or even Toyota if you don't do your own research. These companies could also face losses, and that's why buy what you know doesn't mean making blind purchases. In reality, it's a concept that teaches you to use familiar companies and products as a jumping-off point for your investment ideas. And that's exactly what Anne did with Coca-Cola and Pepsi, sharing Plow and Pfizer, and many others. She loved movies, but that didn't mean she bought shares of every movie company she saw in sight. And that's one of the most important lessons for any investor, no matter how experienced they may be. But there's one more thing which seems to be the key to becoming rich while working a 9-to-5. And we can see this habit in almost every millionaire today. And that is number 3, living below your means. One thing we can all agree on is the economy. It's in shambles. And let's be honest, it's not getting any better anytime soon. And even if it does, most of us won't be here to see that time. So that's why living below your means, or at least cutting cost by ditching unnecessary expenses, is very important, especially for people who are working for a limited salary. As Warren Buffett says, if you buy things you don't need, soon you will have to sell things you need. The surprising thing is that Anne used to follow this rule, despite living in a time when common necessities like gas, rent, housing, and food were pretty cheap. But there are a few reasons behind her frugal lifestyle. 1. She spent years working for the IRS and was never once promoted. She felt as if the department she dedicated her life to didn't appreciate her enough. And it was true. So she sought revenge by showing them that even with $5,000 of annual income, she could become wealthy. Secondly, during the depths of the Great Depression, Anne gave her youngest brother, who was an amateur Wall Street broker, $3,000 to invest. Up until 1934, her brother did well with her money, but then the firm he worked for made some bad decisions. Long story short, she lost all her money, and naturally, she blamed her brother for it. So holding on to stocks, being obsessed with amassing a fortune, and just showing that she was much more than just an IRS auditor was her way of taking revenge. And that's why she became an extremist with her frugality. Her entire life was spent in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. She rarely bought any furniture, and having fun just wasn't part of her life. Of course, this is not something you should do because it's unhealthy for your own self. Frugality is good, but only when it's balanced with a little fun and comfort. People tend to lose sight of why they're investing in the first place and get fixated on stacking up the dollar bills in their brokerage accounts. As Walter Mischel said, delayed gratification doesn't mean no gratification. And that brings me to the last lesson we can learn from Anne Scheiber's life. Number 4, there will always be losses. Anne trusted her brother with $3,000, which was more than half of what she took home yearly, and she lost it. She battled through the Great Depression and various economic crashes, yet she never let go of her stocks. Making decisions, especially financial decisions, while panicking is the most dangerous thing you can do because you're not thinking clearly. Investing is a long-term game, and it takes patience. And no matter what Anne Scheiber's reasons may have been, it teaches us the gist of investing in stocks. Smart, long-term, and well-researched investments almost always work out, even if it takes decades. And remember, once you've made some money, don't put it in the bank before you watch this video.